She said it like she was ordering coffee, calm on the surface but with that tiny crack in her voice that told me she was already panicking inside. "I need a boyfriend to meet my parents this weekend," and I laughed, because it sounded ridiculous, because life doesn't work like romantic comedies, because people don't just borrow boyfriends the way they borrow phone chargers. But when I looked at her, really looked, sitting across from me in that late-night cafe with cold tea untouched between us, I realized she wasn't joking at all, her fingers twisting the napkin into something shapeless, her eyes refusing to meet mine. And that's when the weight of her words landed, heavy and unexpected. And before I could stop myself, I said the first stupid thing that came to mind. "Not sleeping on the sofa, right?" And she finally looked up, startled, then laughed, soft at first, then louder. The kind of laugh that sounds like relief breaking through fear. And she said, "Deal." And just like that, my quiet, predictable weekend turned into something I couldn't rewind. Because you see, we weren't strangers, not even close. We were co-workers once, then friends. Then that strange category where everyone assumes something is going on, but no one dares to ask. Late-night conversations, inside jokes, shared silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward. But never this, never pretending, never stepping into each other's lives like this. And as she explained, her parents were traditional. Visiting unexpectedly, convinced she was hiding a serious relationship. Tired of hearing excuses about being too busy, I nodded like I understood, like I wasn't imagining every possible way this could go wrong, like I hadn't just agreed to lie to two people who raised her and knew her better than anyone. And by the time we left the cafe, the city lights blurring into streaks of yellow and white, the plan was already forming. Fake dating rules spoken half jokingly, half seriously, no holding hands unless necessary, no overdoing it, no falling for real. She said that last one with a grin, but something in her eyes lingered. And when we reached her apartment building, she hesitated, keys in hand, then turned and said, "You don't have to do this." And that should have been my exit, the responsible choice, the mature response. But instead I shrugged and said, "Too late. I already practiced my respectful boyfriend face," and she smiled again. But this time it was softer, warmer, and as I walked away, I felt it. That strange pull, the quiet shift, the sense that something ordinary had just crossed into dangerous territory, and the weekend hadn't even begun yet. By Friday afternoon, I was standing in front of her door with an overnight bag that felt heavier than it should, not because of clothes, but because of expectations. Because pretending is easy until you're inside someone's personal space, until you smell their shampoo in the hallway, until you hear the nervous way they pace before opening the door. And when she did, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, hair tied back like she didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, she froze for half a second, eyes scanning me like she was seeing me differently, not as her friend, not as her emergency solution, but as something new, something undefined. And she said, "You look convincing," and I replied, "You too," and that was the truth. Because suddenly I could see what everyone else probably always had, and the apartment felt smaller once her parents arrived that evening. Her mother's sharp eyes missing nothing, her father's polite handshake gripping just a second too long, testing, measuring, and I slipped into the role like muscle memory. Stories half true, half made up, how we met, how long we'd been together, why they hadn't met me before. And every time I glanced at her, she played along perfectly, touching my arm when she laughed, leaning closer during conversations. The performance so natural it scared me, because it didn't feel like acting anymore. It felt like something we'd been rehearsing unconsciously for years. And when her mother suggested we all eat together, when her father asked about my plans, my job, my intentions, I answered carefully, honestly enough to feel real, but vague enough to avoid traps. And somewhere between dessert and tea, her mother smiled, really smiled, and said, "You suit each other." And something inside me tightened, because that sentence carried weight, because it wasn't supposed to matter, because this wasn't supposed to feel like validation. And later that night, when her parents retired to the guest room and silence settled over the apartment, like a held breath, We stood facing each other in the living room, unsure how to drop the act, unsure if we even wanted to, and I gestured toward the sofa, raising an eyebrow, repeating my joke, and she rolled her eyes, crossed her arms, then said quietly, "You can take the bed," and I laughed, shaking my head, saying I was fine. But she stepped closer, voice softer now. "They'll notice," and that's when it hit me. Pretending had consequences. Even in the quiet moments, even when no one was watching. And as I lay awake on the sofa later, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of her moving in the bedroom, I realized this weekend wasn't just about fooling her parents anymore. It was about something much more dangerous. The truth we were accidentally uncovering. And if you're feeling that tension right now, that slow burn, that question of where this is going, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter will change everything. You think you know about pretending versus feeling. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Morning arrived too soon, sunlight creeping through the curtains like it was trying to expose something we hadn't agreed to name. And when I walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, she was already there making coffee, hair loose, sleeves rolled up, looking so natural in that domestic space it felt wrong. Like I was watching a future I hadn't earned. And for a second we just stood there, the air thick with unspoken thoughts, until she cleared her throat and said, "Good morning." "Boyfriend?" Exaggerated and playful, and I answered, "Morning," simpler, quieter, because the joke didn't land the same anymore. And her parents joined us soon after. Breakfast turning into another performance. Another layer of closeness. Inside jokes that had been born just hours earlier, but sounded years old. And when her father suggested a walk after breakfast, just the two of us, my heart skipped in a way that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with fear, because this was where lies usually cracked, where men were measured by silence as much as words. And as we walked through the quiet neighborhood, he asked about my past, about my intentions, about whether I saw a future with his daughter. And I answered honestly again, not realizing until later that honesty, even wrapped in a lie, as a way of revealing more than intended. And when he stopped, looked at me carefully and said, "She deserves someone who chooses her, not someone who stays out of convenience." I nodded, throat tight, because I knew he was right, because I knew I hadn't just agreed to help a friend. I'd stepped into something that demanded more than pretending. And when we returned, she searched my face, silently asking how it went, and I smiled, nodding. But inside something had shifted, something irreversible. The afternoon passed in fragments, laughter, shared stories, a photo her mother insisted on taking, her hand slipping into mine naturally this time. Not for show, not because someone was watching, but because it felt right, and that scared me more than any awkward question ever could. And later, as her parents packed their bags, promising to visit again, her mother hugged me tightly and whispered, "Take care of her," and I promised I would. Because in that moment I meant it, not as part of a script, not as a favor, but as a truth that had finally found its voice. And when the door closed behind them, the apartment fell silent again, heavier this time. The performance officially over, and she exhaled deeply, leaning against the door, then laughed. We survived, but her eyes were searching mine, waiting, and I knew this was the moment. Pretending either ended cleanly or became something else entirely, and I said softly, "We did," then hesitated, then added, "But I don't think I can pretend anymore." And her smile faded, replaced by something raw, something honest, and she whispered, "Neither can I." And the words that followed weren't rehearsed, weren't clever, weren't safe. They were messy confessions, fears about being alone, about expectations, about not wanting to lose what we already had. And I listened, really listened, realizing how close we'd been all along without crossing the line. And when I finally said, "What if we stop pretending and see where this actually goes?" She didn't answer immediately, just stepped closer, rested her forehead against mine and said, "Then you're definitely not sleeping on the sofa." And we laughed. Relief and joy tangled together, because sometimes the best stories don't begin with certainty. They begin with risk, with honesty after the lie. And as we stood there, no parents, no roles, no scripts, just two people choosing each other for real, I realized something important. Some weekends change everything. Some jokes turn into promises, and some pretend boyfriends become the real thing.